Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is The Secret Doctrine, and we are reading aloud and discussing, as we go along, the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but some people seem to find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration with Addenda. We're going to do something a little bit different today. We've got two chapters that we're going to go through because they are both quite short and don't contain a whole lot of anything. So this is housekeeping more than anything else. 1. Reasons for these addenda. Many of the doctrines contained in the foregoing 7 stanzas and commentaries, having been studied and critically examined by some Western theosophists, certain of the occult teachings have been found wanting from the ordinary standpoint of modern scientific knowledge. They seem to encounter insuperable difficulties in the way of their acceptance and to require reconsideration in view of scientific criticism. Some friends have already been tempted to regret the necessity of so often calling in question the assertions of modern science. It appeared to them, and I here repeat only their arguments, that to run counter to the teachings of the most eminent exponents was to court a premature discomfiture in the eyes of the Western world. It is therefore desirable to define once and for all the position which the writer, who does not agree in this with her friends, intends to maintain. So far as science remains what in the words of Professor Huxley it is, vis-a-vis, organized common sense, so far as its inferences are drawn from accurate premises, its generalizations resting on a purely inductive basis, every theosophist and occultist welcomes, respectfully and with due admiration, its contributions to the domain of cosmological law. There can be no possible conflict between the teachings of occult and the so-called exact science, where the conclusions of the latter are grounded on a substratum of unassailable fact. It is only when its more ardent exponents, overstepping the limits of observed phenomena in order to penetrate into the arcana of being, attempt to wrench the formation of cosmos and its living forces from spirit, and attribute all to blind matter, that the occultists claim the right to dispute and call in question their theories. Science cannot, owing to the very nature of things, unveil the mystery of the universe around us. Science can, it is true, collect, classify, and generalize upon phenomena, but the occultist, arguing from admitted metaphysical data, declares that the daring explorer, who would probe the innermost secrets of nature, must transcend the narrow limitations of sense and transfer his consciousness into the region of phenomena and the sphere of primal causes. To effect this, he must develop faculties which are absolutely dormant, save in a few rare and exceptional cases. In the constitution of the offshoots of our present fifth root race in Europe and America, he can, in no other conceivable manner, collect the facts on which to base his speculations. Is this not apparent on the principles of inductive logic and metaphysics alike? On the other hand, whatever the writer may do, she will never be able to satisfy both truth and science. To offer the reader a systematic and uninterrupted version of the archaic stanzas is impossible. A gap of 43 verses, or slokas, has to be left between the 7th, already given, and the 51st, which is the subject of Book 2, though the latter are made to run from one sequence for easier reading and reference. The appearance of man on earth alone occupies as many stanzas which describe minutely his primal evolution from the human Dayan Kohans, the state of the globe at that time, etc., etc. a great number of names referring to chemical substances and other compounds, which have now ceased to combine together and are therefore unknown to the later offshoots of our fifth race, occupy a considerable space. As they are simply untranslatable and would remain in every case inexplicable, they are omitted, along with those which cannot be made public. Nevertheless, even the little that is given will irritate any follower and defender of dogmatic, materialistic science who happens to read this. Before proceeding to other stanzas, it is proposed, therefore, to defend those already given. They are not in perfect accord or harmony with modern science. This we all know. Had they been, however, as much in agreement with the views of modern knowledge as a lecture by Sir W. Thomson, they would have been rejected all the same. For they teach belief in conscious powers and spiritual entities, in terrestrial, semi-intelligent, and highly intellectual forces on other planes. Footnote. Their intellection, of course, being of quite a different nature to any we can conceive of on Earth. Forces on other planes, and in beings that dwell around us in spheres imperceptible, whether through telescope or microscope. Hence, the necessity of examining the beliefs of materialistic science, of comparing its views about the elements with the opinions of the ancients, and of analyzing the physical forces as they exist in modern perception, before the occultists admit themselves to be in the wrong. We shall touch upon the constitution of the sun and planets, and the occult characteristics of what are called devas and genii, and are now termed by science force or modes of motion, and see whether esoteric belief is defensible or not. Vide infra God monads and atoms. Notwithstanding the efforts made to the contrary, an unprejudiced mind will discover under Newton's agent, material or immaterial, of his third letter to Bentley, the agent which causes gravity, and in his personal working, God. One finds just as much of the metaphysical devas and genii as in Kepler's Angelus Rector, conducting each planet, and the species and materia by which celestial bodies were carried along in their courses, according to that astronomer. We shall have, in Book 2, to openly approach dangerous subjects. We must bravely face science and declare, in the teeth of materialistic learning, of idealism, hylo-idealism, positivism, and all-denying modern psychology, that the true occultist believes in lords of light, that he believes in a sun which, far from being simply a lamp of day, moving in accordance with physical law, and far from being merely one of those suns, which, according to Richter, are sunflowers of a higher light, is, like milliards of other suns, the dwelling or the vehicle of a god, and a host of gods. In this question, of course, it is the occultist who will be worsted. They will be considered on the prima facie aspect of the dispute to be ignoramuses, and labeled with more than one of the usual epithets given to those whom the superficially judging public, itself ignorant of the great underlying truths in nature, accuses of believing in medieval superstitions. Let it be so. Submitting beforehand to every criticism in order to go on with their task, they only claim the privilege of showing that the physicists are as much at loggerheads among themselves in their speculations as the latter are with the teachings of occultism. The sun is matter, and the sun is spirit. Our ancestors, the heathen, along with their modern successors, the Parsis, were, and are, wise enough in their generation to see in it the symbol of divinity, and at the same time to sense within, concealed by the physical symbol, the bright God of spiritual and terrestrial light. Such belief is now regarded as a superstition only by rank materialism, which denies deity, spirit, soul, and admits no intelligence outside the mind of man. But if too much of wrong superstition, bred by churchianity, as Lawrence Oliphant calls it, renders a man a fool, too much skepticism makes him mad. We prefer the charge of folly, in believing too much, to that of a madness which denies everything. as do materialism and idealism. Hence, the occultists are fully prepared to receive their dues from materialism and to meet the adverse criticism which will be poured out on this work, not for writing it, but for believing in that which it contains. Therefore, the discoveries, hypotheses, and unavoidable objections which will be brought forward by the scientific critics must be anticipated and disposed of. It has also to be shown how far the occult teachings depart from real science, and whether the ancient or the modern theories are the most logically and philosophically correct. The unity and mutual relations of all parts of the cosmos were known to the ancients before they became evident to modern astronomers and philosophers. And if even the external and visible portions of the universe and their mutual relations cannot be explained in any other terms than those used by the adherents of the mechanical theory of the universe in physical science, it follows that no materialist who denies that the soul of cosmos, which appertains to metaphysical philosophy, exists, has the right to trespass upon that metaphysical domain. That physical science is trying to, and actually does, encroach upon it is only one more proof that might is right, and no more. Another good reason for these addenda is this: since only a certain portion of the secret teachings can be given out in the present age, if they were published without any explanations or commentary, the doctrines would never be understood even by theosophists. Therefore, they must be contrasted with the speculations of modern science. Archaic axioms must be placed side by side with modern hypotheses, and comparison left to the sagacious reader. On the question of the seven governors, as Hermes calls these seven builders, the spirits which guide the operations of nature, the animated atoms of which are the shadows in their world, of their primaries in the astral realms, this work will, of course, besides the men of science, have every materialist against it. But this opposition can, at most, be only temporary. People have laughed at everything and scouted of every unpopular idea at first, and then ended up accepting it. Materialism and skepticism are evils that must remain in the world as long as man has not quitted his present gross form to don the one he had during the first and second races of this round. Unless skepticism and our present natural ignorance are equilibrated by intuition and natural spirituality, every being afflicted with such feelings will see in himself no better than a bundle of flesh, bones, and muscles, with an empty garret inside him which serves the purpose of storing his sensations and feelings. Sir Humphrey Davy was a great scientist, as deeply versed in physics as any theorist of our day, yet he loathed materialism. "I heard with disgust," he says, "in the dissecting rooms, the plan of the physiologist, of the gradual secretion of matter, and its becoming endued with irritability, ripening into sensibility, and acquiring such organs as were necessary by its own inherent forces, and at last rising into intellectual existence. Nevertheless, physiologists are not the most to be blamed for speaking of that only which they can see and estimate on the evidence of their physical senses. Astronomers and physicists are, we consider, far more illogical in their materialistic views than even physiologists, and this has to be proved. Milton's light, ethereal first of things, quintessence pure, has become with the materialist only prime purer light of all material beings, first and best. For the occultist, it is both spirit and matter, behind the mode of motion, now regarded as the property of matter, and nothing more. They perceive the radiant noumenon. It is the spirit of light, the firstborn of the eternal pure element, whose energy, or emanation, is stored in the sun, the great life-giver of the physical world, as the hidden concealed spiritual sun is the light and life-giver of the spiritual and psychic realms. Bacon was one of the first to strike the keynote of materialism, not only by his inductive method, renovated from ill-digested Aristotle, but by the general tenor of his writings. He inverts the order of mental evolution when saying that the first creation of God was the light of the sense, the last was the light of the reason, and his Sabbath work, ever since the illumination, is the illumination of the Spirit. It is just the reverse. The light of the Spirit is the eternal Sabbath of the mystic or occultist, and he pays little attention to that of mere sense. That which is meant by the allegorical sentence, fiat lux, is, when esoterically rendered, let there be the sons of light, or the noumena of all phenomena. Thus the Roman Catholics rightly interpret the passage as referring to angels, and wrongly as meaning powers created by an anthropomorphic God, whom they personify in the ever-thundering and punishing Jehovah. These beings are the sons of light because they emanate from and are self-generated in that infinite ocean of light, whose one pole is pure spirit, lost in the absoluteness of non-being, and the other, the matter in which it condenses, crystallizing into a more and more gross type as it descends into manifestation. Therefore, matter, though it is in one sense but the elusive dregs of that light whose limbs are the creative forces, yet has in it the full presence of the soul thereof, and that principle which none, not even the sons of light, evolved from its absolute darkness, will ever know. Sorry. The idea is as beautifully as it is truthfully expressed by Milton, who hails the holy light, which is the offspring of heaven firstborn, and of the eternal co-eternal beam, since God is light, and never but in unapproached light, dwelt from eternity, dwelt in thee, bright effluence and bright essence increate. I did not have a whole lot to add to that. It was merely relaying reasoning behind doing. This is the other part that we're going to get to, and it is, again, quite short. Sorry. And now, occultism puts to science the question, is light a body, or is it not? Whatever the answer of the latter, the former is prepared to show that, to this day, the most eminent physicists know neither one way nor the other. To know what is light and whether it is an actual substance or a mere undulation of the ethereal medium. Science has first to learn what are in reality matter, atom, ether, force. Now, the truth is that it knows nothing of any of these and admits it. It is important right here to remember when this was, right? This was 1888, I believe. So just after the Civil War, just prior to the First World War. Electricity was there, but it was not well understood in the way that it is now. We did not have electron microscopes. We were not able to see the physicality of the atom, right? The individualized atom and the elements that compose it, the proton, neutron, electron, and the various other things that are found later. All of those are the spirit, right? The spirit is literally every atom in existence all at the same time, both on the terrestrial plane and throughout the entirety of the universe. All of it is spirit. The changing from the potential to the active, the kinetic, is the motivator behind the light we see. Light is literally matter in motion. That is something that we know now. So we know matter. We know what an atom is now. Ether is a little bit harder to explain, but it is contained within the word plasma. We have dealt with that quite extensively. Plasma has two phases, active and inactive. Inactive plasma, you can see through it. It is completely invisible. Active plasma is the form of light. It is literally change in motion. Whenever you strike this is plasma. It is changing the butane into different chemical elements. What you are literally seeing is a plasmic exchange. from one to the other. We know what ether is. And force, we have a fairly good understanding of force. Force is applied motion, right? It is what applies the motion. And so it is a variable, but we understand what it is. When it is always going to be a relative term, it is always going to be something different. And what she is talking about more is the decision making than it is the actual pushing. And that's fine. We just need to be aware of it. And so in her day, we did not have an understanding of matter, atom, ether, right? At all. Matter, atom, plasma. Now we do. Now we have electron microscopes. Now we can see the interaction. We can watch chemical bonds being formed and broken. The exothermic reaction of which is the light we see. Whenever lightning strikes, it is an ionization process. It is literally changing the ionic bonds of everything contained within the visible light. That is plasma activated. And so we do have some knowledge of these now. It has not even agreed what to believe in, as dozens of hypotheses emanating from various and very eminent scientists on the same subject are antagonistic to each other and often self-contradictory. That is because they were only beginning to understand what the things were, right? Prior to having an electron microscope and being able to see the individualized elements, all you can do is speculate. Until you can actually see it, all you have is speculation. And speculation is going to be self-contradictory sometimes, right? My understanding of this and your understanding of this aren't going to be the same unless we can independently verify that through independently verifiable means. And so, yes, sometimes it is going to be antagonistic and contradictory when you are discovering how something works. Thus, their learned speculations may, with a stretch of goodwill, be accepted as working hypotheses in a secondary sense, as Stallo puts it. But, being radically inconsistent with each other, they must finally end by mutually destroying themselves, as declared by the author of Concepts of Modern Physics. It must not be forgotten that the several departments of science are simply arbitrary divisions of labor. In these several departments, the same physical object may be considered under different aspects. The physicist may study its molecular relations, while the chemist determines its atomic constitution. But when they both deal with the same element or agent, it cannot have one set of properties in physics and another set contradictory of them in chemistry. If the physicist and chemist alike assume the existence of ultimate atoms, absolutely invariable in bulk and weight, the atom cannot be a cube or oblate spheroid for physical, and a sphere for chemical purposes. You're right. A group of constant atoms cannot be an aggregate of extended and absolutely inert and impenetrable masses in a crucible or retort. And a system of mere centers of force as part of a magnet or a Clement battery. Well, you're kind of wrong there. A group of constant atoms can be an aggregate of extended and absolutely inert and impenetrable masses, right? Not in and of themselves as an individual atom, but a chunk of uranium is pretty solid. It's fairly impenetrable. Well, yes, we can penetrate it, but it takes an extreme amount of energy to do so. And in doing so, we release another equal amount of extreme energy. So, yes, it can be absolutely inert and impenetrable. It can be. Not the individualized atom, but instead the aggregate thereof. Right. A system of mere centers of force, that is really close to what it actually is, right? It is the individualized helium with one proton, one neutron, one electron, or one electron rotating around the proton and neutron, which are magnetic centers of force. And so that is pretty true. The universal ether cannot be soft and mobile to please the chemist and rigid elastic to satisfy the physicist. And again, that is terms, right? You have active plasma and you have inactive plasma, and active plasma is going to be more rigid than inactive plasma because it is inventing a change. That doesn't mean that light, fire, flame is solid. I can pass my finger through it, right? But if I were to hold my finger over the top of it, it would let me know exactly how much it is a rigid element, right? It is fluid, it is moving, it is gaseous, it is dispersing. But regardless, it is solid enough that it will burn you if you hold your hand over the top of it. These are terms that are relative, not necessarily dichotomous, right? The light and the potential for light can coexist briefly in the change. And so there can be rigid elastic and there can be soft and mobile from the same element in different circumstances. These are all ways of looking at something. It is not necessarily definitional, right? It's not necessarily defined in the way that is being portrayed here. It cannot be continuous at the command of Sir William Thomson and discontinuous on the suggestion of Cauchy and Fresnel. And again, this is during the exploratory phases of learning something. And so there will be discontinuity, discontinuity. Footnote, concepts of modern physics for 150 years ago. We have different concepts these days. The eminent physicist G.A. Hearn may likewise be quoted saying the same in the 43rd volume of Memories de l'Académie Royale de Belgique, which we translate from the French as cited. When one sees the assurance with which all today affirm doctrines which attribute the collectivity, the universality of the phenomenon to the motions alone of the atom, one has a right to expect to find likewise unanimity in the qualities described to this unique being, the foundation of all that exists. Now, from the first examination of the particular systems proposed, one feels the strangest deception. One perceives that the atom of the chemist, the atom of the physicist, and that of the metaphysician, and that of the mathematician, have absolutely nothing in common but the name. The inevitable result is the existing subdivision of our sciences, each of which, in its own little pigeonhole, constructs an atom which satisfies the requirements of the phenomena it studies, without troubling itself in the least about the requirements proper to the phenomena of the neighboring pigeonhole. The metaphysician banishes the principles of attraction and repulsion as dreams. The mathematician, who analyzes the laws of elasticity and those of the propagation of light, admits them implicitly without even naming them. The chemist cannot explain the grouping of the atoms in his often complicated molecules without attributing to his atoms specific distinguishing qualities. For the physicist and the metaphysician, partisans of the modern doctrines, the atom is, on the contrary, always and everywhere the same. What am I saying? There is no agreement, even in one and the same science, as to the properties of the atom. Each constructs an atom to suit his own fancy, in order to explain some special phenomenon with which he is particularly concerned. And again, this is due to incomplete science. Footnote, Recherches expérimentales sur la relation qui existe entre la résistance des pairs et ses températures. Page 86, or 68. The above is the photographically correct image of modern science and physics. The prerequisite of that incessant play of the scientific imagination, which is so often found in Professor Tyndall's eloquent discourses, is vivid indeed, as shown by Stallo, and for contradictory variety leaves far behind it any fantasies of occultism. However, it may be, if physical theories are confessedly mere formal explanatory didactic devices, and if atomism is only a symbolical graphic system, footnote 2, from the criticism of concepts of modern sciences and nature. Then the occultist can hardly be regarded as assuming too much when he places alongside these devices and symbolical systems of modern science the symbols and devices of archaic teachings. And that is going to bring us to the end of the reasons for the addenda, and modern physicists are playing at blind man's bluff. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a couple of rather simple topics. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something that I apologize for. It is important to bear in mind as we look back through history at these works that they did not have the benefit of the things that we do. They did not have the electron microscope, so they could not see the fundamental grouping of the nucleus and the surrounding orbit of the electron. And so they speculated. And it was through the speculation that we came to know what we have. Some of that speculation is naturally going to be contradictory. I'm having the same problem with this work, just as I did with Isis Unveiled and various other ones that we have done. There are things that, looking back through the lens of time and history and actual experience, we can know are simply not true, right? There are things that we can know are true. And there are things that they were speculating because they did not have that knowledge, right? They were only speculating that there were individual elements at this point in history. They did not know that there was an independent helium, hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, nitrogen. They did not know that these things were separate. There had been ruminations thousands of years ago. Nobody knew, right? It was guesses. Once we had the ability to look at it through the microscope, we were able to solidify those guesses. We were able to dismiss the ones that weren't in accordance with the actuality of the subject. That is what I am doing here, right? That is what I am attempting to do on an esoteric level. There are things that were believed, and there are things which are wrong. At least in my speculations. And until we can verifiably prove one way or the other, my speculations don't have to accord with anyone else's. That is how progress is made. If I am wrong, experientially, I will correct myself. But if you come to me talking about, well, there has to be some prototype sun that we get our light from, and despite the other sun, I'm going to tell you no, right? We've talked about it several times, that there is a light, but it's not the sun. It's not the same. The sun is a physical object which transfers energy from far off in the cosmos to us, in my estimation. I don't think that it's some fission plant just sitting up there doing a thing and condensing. It does not appear to be working in that way. It appears to be a conduit for farther out emanations to feed us. Part of that is going to, by necessity, equal the lessening of the thing. And by that I mean, this lighter, when I bought it, was full of butane. As I use the spark to create the flame, it consumes the butane. The fire is not the butane, it is the chemical action happening inside of the plasma. Right? It is changing the original by volume. That is the same thing that is happening in an electrode and a welding rod, right? If you put the welding stick into the anode and you touch it to a piece of metal that is grounded, it is consumed and it creates another thing. But the rod itself isn't doing it. It is the electricity playing through and changing the chemical makeup. And in the process, light is emitted, heat is emitted, and the medium is consumed. That is the same thing, in my estimation, that is going on with the sun. I could be wrong. I am perfectly willing to be wrong, but I have to be proven wrong. We have guesses about what we think the sun does. People guess that it is fission. Other people have guessed that it was fusion. Some people guess that it is all kinds of things. There were people that thought that it was just a torch. They thought that the moon was made out of cheese. People have believed a lot of things, and they have been proven through time to not be correct. I believe that the current thoughts about the sun are going to be relatively the same. It is much more of an electrode than it is a self-contained device. There is many reasons to believe that it both receives the energy and passes it on, as opposed to creating the energy by itself. If any of that was confusing to you, I'm going to give you a scientific resource and tell you to check out the Thunderbolts Project, because they can explain all of that much better than I can. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, a sub, throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that I said. If it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. And if there is another work you would like to see me discuss in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the comments as well. If you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks. It will be greatly appreciated. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole and complete, just the way that you are, and this has been Pitch State. Peace.